I was so proud of my husband. After everything we'd been through, he finally got the promotion we had dreamed about for years. I wanted to celebrate him, to surprise him, to show him how much I believed in him. So I left work early, picked up his favorite cake, and headed to his office with a small gift and a heart full of love. I thought I was about to make his day unforgettable. But when I opened the door to his boss's office, I walked straight into a moment that would change everything. What I saw shattered me and set me on a path I never imagined I'd take. But before we get into the story, make sure to subscribe if you like what I do here. And don't forget to hit the like button so YouTube shows this video to more people. All right, let's get into the story. It all started with a simple message that should have filled my heart with joy. "I just got promoted," my husband texted, along with a string of exclamation points and a happy emoji. My eyes lit up as I read it. We'd been through tough financial times lately, and this was exactly the kind of news we both needed. I felt so proud of him. So proud, in fact, that I decided to surprise him. I'd leave work early, stop by his favorite bakery, and get him that ridiculous chocolate mousse cake he loved, but always claimed was too expensive for no reason. I even picked up a little gift, a leather wallet I'd been saving for, the kind he once pointed at in a store window months ago. My heart raced as I imagined the look on his face when he saw me at the office door. Cake in one hand, and his gift in the other. I got dressed in my favorite coat, the one he always said made me look like a CEO, and felt a warmth spread through my chest. Love, pride, celebration. I parked a few blocks from his office to avoid the lunchtime crowd, walking the rest of the way with a bounce in my step. The receptionist greeted me with a forced smile. I told her I was here to see my husband. He worked in the marketing department. She pointed me toward the hallway but avoided eye contact. I thought nothing of it. Maybe she was just having a bad day. I walked down the corridor, passing framed awards and posters about innovation and leadership. My heart beat faster as I approached the office. And then I saw him. Or rather, I didn't. The door was closed. But someone else was there. A guy in a button-down shirt, standing just outside another office. I asked if he knew where my husband was. He gave me a smirk that stopped me cold. "He's inside," he said casually, jerking his thumb toward the executive suite, thanking the boss for the promotion. Real enthusiastically. The way he said it, laced with sarcasm and something colder, made my stomach clench. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. But he just chuckled and walked away. That's when I noticed the faint sounds coming from behind the door. Laughing, talking, and something else. Something softer. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. My mind still wanted to believe it was innocent. Maybe she was congratulating him. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe. And then I opened the door. And there they were. My husband. And his boss. Her hands were on his chest. His lips were on hers. I froze. Time didn't slow down. It just stopped. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. And yet everything was crystal clear. Her desk. His jacket on the floor. Her lipstick smeared. His hands on her waist. They didn't even notice me at first. When they finally did, he jerked back like a child caught stealing. "Wait, baby. It's not..." But I didn't stay long enough to hear the rest. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the cake at them. I just turned around and walked out, the sound of my heels clicking like a metronome on the cold office floor. I walked back to the car without blinking, set the cake gently in the passenger seat, and drove home. I didn't even notice I was holding my breath until I stepped into our apartment. It still smelled like the cinnamon candles I'd lit that morning. I put the cake on the kitchen counter, took out my phone, and began the process. First, I logged into our shared bank account and froze every card under his name. Then I changed the locks with the Smart Lock app, locking the door with a few taps. Finally, I texted him one word. Don't come home. I sat on the couch in silence, the weight of betrayal slowly replacing the shock. No tears yet. Just silence, the kind of silence that grows roots inside your chest and chokes you from the inside. I wasn't ready to fall apart. Not yet. I had work to do, because while he was kissing his way to a promotion, I was about to write the first chapter of his downfall. The first call came 15 minutes later, then another, and another. I let them all go to voicemail. He didn't deserve my voice, not yet. Not after what I saw. Not after he reduced our life together to a cheap office cliché. But by the fifth call, something in me shifted. I didn't want to hear him beg. I wanted him to feel the silence. So I blocked his number. That's when the emails started, then texts from his work phone. It's not what it looked like. Please talk to me. Let me explain. He didn't know I'd already seen more than enough, but still I stayed quiet. The silence was louder than any scream. Then came the call from his mother. She asked if everything was okay. He'd called her crying, apparently, said I locked him out of the apartment and froze his cards. I told her calmly, ask your son what he was doing in his boss's office when he got that promotion. She went quiet, then hung up. Hours passed. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I sat on the floor, still in my coat, staring at the gift I never got to give him. The wallet, still wrapped. The cake, now sweating under the plastic. It was surreal. The version of me that existed that morning was gone, replaced by someone colder, sharper, someone who wouldn't look away. I opened my laptop and started digging. His calendar was synced with our shared cloud. Rookie mistake. I pulled up weeks of entries, lunches, meetings, strategy sessions with his boss outside office hours. I checked our shared credit card statements, dinners charged to our account that he said were with clients. The same overpriced wine showing up again and again. I cross-referenced locations, receipts, even parking apps. And a picture began to form. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was calculated, rehearsed. The promotion wasn't a result of hard work. It was a reward. For loyalty of a different kind. That night, I received one last desperate email. The subject line just said, "Please." I opened it. Inside, he'd written a long message, said it was a mistake, that it just happened, that it didn't mean anything. But I wasn't reading his excuses. I was reading his patterns. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was sorry he got caught. I replied with a single sentence. You can collect your things when I say you can. Then I shut the laptop. The next morning, I changed the Wi-Fi password, disconnected his devices, and packed a small box with some of his essentials. Enough to get by. I dropped it off at his best friend's house and texted him the address. He showed up an hour later, banging on the door. I didn't answer. He screamed my name in the hallway, said he could explain, said I was blowing it out of proportion. I let him yell. Let the neighbors hear. Let his shame echo in public the way my heartbreak screamed in private. When he finally left, I took a long shower. The kind that burns your skin a little. The kind that feels like punishment and rebirth at once. Then I sat at the table and began writing a list of everything he'd lose. It started with the apartment, in my name. Then the car, also mine. The savings account I managed. The investments I made. One by one, I ticked them off. He thought I was just the supportive wife, the background character in his success story. But I'd been building my own foundation in the shadows, and now he'd feel what it was like to have it all ripped away in one afternoon. Just like I did. The silence didn't last forever. By the end of the week, he was outside my office building, waiting by the parking garage. I saw him before he saw me, pacing like a man who knew his world was collapsing. I didn't stop walking. He called my name. I kept moving. He stepped in front of me, desperation all over his face. "Please," he said, "can we just talk?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I once trusted more than anyone, now reduced to a stranger with pleading eyes and shaking hands. "Talk?" I said coldly. "Now, you want to talk?" He nodded, trying to reach for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't touch me." He started rambling about how it was a mistake, about how she came on to him, about how it didn't mean anything. The usual script. But I wasn't there to listen. I was there to end the scene. "You've already said everything you needed to say," I told him, "with your lips, in her office." His face dropped. The arrogance he once wore so comfortably was gone, replaced by shame and fear. Real fear. I could tell he was starting to realize something, that this wasn't going to be fixed with flowers, or a dinner apology, or sweet words. I was too far gone for that. And I had plans. After I left him standing there, I went straight to a lawyer's office. I'd booked the appointment 2 days before. I brought all my documents, financial statements, screenshots of his messages, calendar entries, everything. The lawyer read through them, impressed. "You've already done half my job," she said with a smirk. I nodded. "I'm not here to cry," I told her. "I'm here to finish this cleanly and take back my life." And I meant it. We drafted the paperwork. Since the apartment was in my name, he had no legal right to it. Since the accounts were mine, he had no claim. The lawyer said it was one of the most lopsided cases she'd ever seen. In my favor. I left that office with power in my hands. But I wasn't done. That night, I went back to his company website. I knew the HR department head from a charity event months ago. We'd chatted, even exchanged emails. I messaged her, saying I had something important to discuss, privately and professionally. The next day, we met at a coffee shop across town. I showed her the calendar screenshots, the credit card receipts, even the photo I took when I walked in on them. She was stunned. I told her I wasn't looking for vengeance, just fairness. But I also made it clear that if the company protected them, I'd go public. Not just online, in court. HR took it seriously. Very seriously. Internal investigations were launched. His boss, the woman he betrayed me with, was suddenly on extended leave. He too began facing questions. I could almost feel the walls closing in on them both. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to beg. I just had to let their own actions do the damage. My phone buzzed with new emails from him every night. Some angry, some apologetic, some pitiful. He accused me of ruining his life, of overreacting. He even tried to guilt me, saying we were supposed to build a life together. But I had already accepted the truth. He burned the house down and expected me to wait with a fire extinguisher. No, not anymore. I replied once, just once. You set the fire. I just stepped out of the way. Then I sent the divorce papers and attached a photo, the same wallet I never gave him, now torn in half, resting on top of the untouched cake. He never responded. But I knew he got it. I could feel it. The weeks that followed were eerily quiet, almost peaceful. I didn't hear from him again, and that silence was its own kind of music. But through mutual friends and whispers from former colleagues, I learned that his world was crumbling faster than even I had imagined. The internal investigation at his company uncovered more than just his affair. Apparently, he had leveraged his relationship with the boss to secure client leads, skipped procedures, and even claimed false overtime to justify late-night strategy sessions that were anything but. HR had no choice but to terminate him. Quietly, of course. No public announcement, just a line in a memo, Effective immediately, Daniel will no longer be with the company. I smiled when I saw it, not out of malice, but because it felt like the universe was finally balancing the scales. As for his boss, she resigned shortly after. To pursue personal projects, the statement said. Translation: to avoid further scrutiny. I didn't need them punished publicly. The professional consequences were enough. Their reputations, once polished and admired, now whispered about in hushed tones by co-workers pretending to be shocked. The woman who had handed him a promotion now couldn't hand in her own resignation fast enough. And him? The man who once strutted around like he owned the world now couldn't even get a job interview without his name raising eyebrows. And I flourished. With the chaos behind me, I finally had the emotional space to invest in myself. I poured my energy into my career and was soon promoted to a leadership role I'd quietly been working toward for years. I moved into a new apartment across town, brighter, bigger, and free of ghosts. I cut my hair, started working out again, took a weekend trip alone to a place I'd always dreamed of but he said was too expensive or not worth it. I sat by the beach, drink in hand, laughing at the thought of how small he'd made me feel. I was never small. He just couldn't handle my size. And then, one night, just when I thought the chapter had closed, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in his unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a note, scribbled and messy. I don't expect forgiveness, it read. But I want you to know I lost everything, and I deserved it. There was something almost tragic about it, not enough to make me cry. Just enough to remind me that actions have consequences, and not everyone survives their own mistakes. I folded the letter and dropped it in the shredder. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it. I had already written my ending, and it didn't include his remorse. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. I signed the papers with the same pen I once used to write love letters to him. The irony didn't escape me. Life moved on. I didn't date right away. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I was looking to enjoy the space I'd reclaimed. Eventually, I started to smile more freely, laugh without hesitation, breathe without weight. Friends told me I seemed lighter, stronger. I was. Because the betrayal that once threatened to break me had instead sharpened me. I had seen what love wasn't. And I had learned what I would never tolerate again. And most importantly, I had proven to myself that I didn't need revenge in the way he probably feared. I didn't scream, slash tires, or go viral with a dramatic story. I simply stood up, stepped away, and let the truth do its work. I protected my dignity like it was sacred. Because it was. In the end, I didn't just survive his betrayal. I transcended it. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful justice of all. It wasn't until a few months later that I allowed myself to fully breathe again. The kind of breath that reaches deep into your chest, past the layers of tension you didn't even know were still there. I was walking through a park on a crisp Sunday morning, coffee in hand, when I saw a couple laughing together on a bench. For a split second, it caught me off guard. Not because I missed him, but because I remembered how I used to laugh like that. Freely, before it all turned into caution and second guesses. But that memory didn't sting the way it used to. It felt distant, like watching a scene from a movie I no longer felt invested in. I sat down on a bench nearby and opened a book, one I'd been meaning to finish for years but never had time for. Life was like that now, filled with small luxuries I once dismissed or sacrificed in the name of partnership. Now, every quiet moment felt like a declaration. I am enough. My days were no longer dictated by his moods, his needs, his ambitions. I woke up when I wanted, cooked for myself, traveled solo. I discovered I liked sleeping in the middle of the bed. I no longer had to explain why I bought a certain bottle of wine or justify spending an entire Saturday binge-watching crime documentaries. The freedom was intoxicating, but it was more than that. It was healing. Of course, there were moments when the old pain tried to return. Triggers came unexpectedly. A certain cologne on a stranger, a commercial playing one of our songs, even walking past the building where he used to work. But instead of letting the memories unravel me, I acknowledged them like passing clouds. I didn't chase them. I didn't run from them. I let them drift, knowing they held no power unless I gave it. I also started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to stay whole. I learned things about myself I'd buried under years of compromise. I realized how often I'd ignored my instincts, softened my voice, made myself smaller so he could feel big. No more. I would never shrink for someone again. One night, while cleaning out my email inbox, I stumbled upon an old draft. A love letter I'd written to him years ago but never sent. It was full of hope, of promises, of belief in the future we were building. I read it slowly, line by line, and then deleted it without hesitation. Not because it made me sad, but because it no longer reflected the person I'd become. That woman, full of dreams and vulnerability, deserved better than what she got, and now she was getting it. From herself. A friend once asked me if I believed in revenge. I told her, not in the traditional sense. Revenge is often messy, loud, chaotic. But what I had done was cleaner, sharper. I had removed myself from his chaos and let the silence speak. I had protected my peace, chosen dignity over destruction. And in the end, that was more satisfying than any explosion. Months turned into a year, and on the anniversary of the day I walked into that office, I treated myself to a spa day and dinner at a rooftop restaurant. Alone. I ordered the most expensive dish on the menu, toasted to myself with champagne, and smiled as the sun set over the city. That day wasn't a wound anymore. It was a milestone. A reminder of the day I stopped being a supporting character in someone else's story and reclaimed the lead role in my own. I don't know where he is now. Maybe he's moved on. Maybe he's still blaming everyone but himself. It doesn't matter. He's a footnote. I'm the headline, and every step I take now is a love letter to the woman I became, the woman who walked into betrayal and walked out stronger than ever. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I was filing some paperwork at home, organizing the last of the documents from the divorce and the financial transition, when I came across an envelope I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked inside a folder labeled Miscellaneous, handwritten in his rushed scrawl. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside were copies of old emails, some printed messages between him and his boss, dated long before the promotion. Months before, actually. I scanned the dates. Meetings labeled as team syncs that clearly weren't, dinners that weren't work-related, and personal messages that left no room for doubt. Their relationship had started long before I walked in on them. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a pattern. And suddenly, all the little red flags I had brushed off over the past year came flooding back. The late nights, the sudden work trips, the extra attention to his appearance, the dismissive tone when I'd ask how his day went. I had suspected things weren't perfect, but I'd convinced myself that he was just stressed, that work had taken a toll on him, that he was distant because life was heavy. I had given him grace, space, trust, and he had used every inch of it to build a secret life. As I sat there holding those pages, I felt a wave of emotions. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. I finally saw it all for what it was. Deliberate, calculated betrayal disguised as professional ambition. And what hit me hardest wasn't just the cheating. It was how easily he lied. How seamlessly he looked me in the eyes for months, kissed my forehead, held my hand, talked about our future, all while living a lie. I wasn't angry that it ended. I was angry that I had given so much of myself to someone who never truly saw me. But then, Just as quickly as the hurt arrived, it passed. Because sitting there, I realized something far more powerful. He didn't get away with anything. Yes, he had his secret affair. Yes, he manipulated the truth. But I still won. Not because I exposed him, not because I tore his life apart, but because I survived it. I kept my soul intact. I walked away with my self-respect, my values, my dignity. And he lost someone who would have gone to war for him, who built a life around his dreams, who never once gave up even when things got hard. He traded that for office flirtations and ego boosts, and now he had to live with the fallout. Alone. I put the papers back in the envelope, sealed it, and tucked it deep in a drawer. Not to hold on to the pain, but as a reminder of what I'd endured, of what I overcame. That night I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of red wine, and played my favorite playlist, the one I used to listen to when I needed to feel grounded. I danced, alone in my living room, barefoot and free. I looked around at the space I had reclaimed, the home that now felt like mine in every sense. And I whispered a quiet thank you to the woman I was becoming. Because in losing someone who never valued me, I found the strength to value myself. And no betrayal, no matter how cruel or calculated, could ever take that away again. There's a certain power in holding the truth, in knowing more than the person who wronged you believes you do. I kept that envelope of emails in my drawer for another week, unsure of whether I'd ever need to use it. But something told me the story wasn't quite over yet. I hadn't heard from him in over a month. But then I received a message from a mutual acquaintance, a former colleague of his who had always been a little too eager to gossip. He asked if I'd heard that Daniel was trying to sue the company for wrongful termination. Claimed they had no cause, that it was personal retaliation. That made me laugh, honestly. After all the lines he crossed, he still thought he could play the victim. That's when I knew the time had come to use what I had. I contacted the company's legal department through my HR contact. I told them I had evidence that contradicted his claims, not just of the affair, but of misconduct, ethical breaches, and misuse of company funds. They arranged a discreet meeting with their legal counsel. I brought the envelope. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I simply laid out the facts, the dates, the messages. Professionals know when they're being handed gold. They thanked me, and they promised confidentiality. I didn't ask what they'd do with the evidence. I didn't need to. A few days later, I heard through the same grapevine that Daniel had suddenly dropped his case. No explanation, no settlement, just silence. I could imagine his face when the company's lawyers presented him with the very same messages he thought were long gone. That moment, the moment he realized I was the one who sealed his final defeat, must have tasted bitter. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw a party or post vague quotes on social media. I just smiled quietly to myself, because I had played the long game. And I had won. After that, I felt something shift inside me. Closure. Not the kind that comes with forgiveness, but the kind that comes from justice. The legal kind. The poetic kind. The personal kind. I cleared out the drawer, shredded the envelope, and decided that was the last piece of him that would ever exist in my home. I wasn't holding on to evidence anymore. I wasn't preparing for battle. I was done. Completely. I could now say with confidence that there was nothing left connecting us. No financial ties, no legal ties, no emotional strings. He was just a story I once lived through, a chapter I had rewritten in my own voice. And now, I was free to write the rest without him. Around that time, I received a job offer from a company I'd admired for years. A senior role, leading a team, working on projects that actually inspired me. It was more money, more freedom, and more recognition than I ever thought possible. I accepted without hesitation. My first day in the new office, I wore that same coat I'd worn the day I discovered the affair, not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of who I had become. That coat no longer belonged to the woman who once stood heartbroken outside a closed office door. It now belonged to a woman who had walked through fire and came out luminous. And as I stood in front of my new team, introducing myself, I felt nothing but pride. Not because I'd taken revenge, but because I'd reclaimed everything he thought he'd taken from me. My peace, my strength, my future. And that was the kind of win no one could ever undo. It was a rainy Monday morning when the final ripple of everything I'd set in motion reached its destination. I was sipping coffee at my desk in the new office when an email came in from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 2 years, a former coworker of Daniel's who had always kept a respectful distance from our relationship drama. Her message was short, almost clinical. Just thought you'd want to know. He's officially blacklisted in the industry. Word got around. He's moved back in with his parents. I stared at the message for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. It wasn't joy I felt, not satisfaction, just a deep, quiet closure, the kind that comes from knowing the last door had finally shut. It wasn't just that he'd lost his job. He'd lost credibility, and in the world he once tried so hard to climb, reputation was currency. Without it, he had nothing. But it wasn't about his fall anymore. This wasn't about punishing him or making him feel what I had felt. It was about completing the arc, bringing the story to its rightful end. I had no need to respond to the email. I simply closed it, took another sip of coffee, and refocused on my work. My life had evolved so far past the wreckage he left behind that even hearing about him now felt like reading about a distant, irrelevant figure from a former life. Still, later that day, I walked into the HR office, this time in my own building, and closed the door behind me. I want to speak to the team about professional ethics and internal accountability, I told them. Real-life examples, preventative education. They agreed. A week later, I stood in front of our entire department and spoke not just as a leader, but as someone who had lived through the consequences of unchecked misconduct. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. What I said was simple. That power, when used without conscience, destroys everything, including the one who abuses it. That silence enables harm. That sometimes the most ethical thing a person can do is speak up. I saw nods in the crowd. I saw thoughtful expressions. And later, more than a few colleagues came up to thank me. They said my words had made them think differently about how they move through their careers, their choices, their responsibilities. It was a strange kind of vindication, not loud, not fiery, but deeply rooted, like a tree that grew tall after surviving a storm. That night, I walked home in the rain without an umbrella, letting the droplets soak into my coat, the same one that had accompanied me through the worst and the best. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush. I felt alive, grounded, whole. I passed the old bakery, the one where I'd bought the cake the day I thought I was surprising my husband with love and pride. The window glowed warm in the darkness, filled with cakes and pastries that looked just as beautiful as they had that day. I stepped inside, ordered the same chocolate mousse cake. The woman behind the counter smiled. "Celebrating something?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "Myself." I took the cake home, set it on the kitchen table, and lit a single candle on top. I didn't sing. I didn't make a wish. I just closed my eyes and felt everything. The pain, the healing, the rise, the peace. And then I blew it out. Not to end something, but to mark a beginning. It was exactly 1 year to the day when I decided to send him the final message. Not because I needed to, but because it felt right to close the circle myself. I had just finished a long day at work. The kind of fulfilling, exhausting day where your brain is tired but your heart is full. when I sat down at my desk, pulled out a sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, and began to write. No digital trail, no email to forward, just ink and intention. The letter was brief. I told him I hoped he found what he was looking for, that I had no hate left, no anger, just a memory of someone who had taught me everything I never wanted in a partner. I thanked him, in a strange way, for setting me free. I sealed the envelope along with a copy of the signed divorce papers, the official final version, and tucked something else inside. The red silk tie he wore the day of his promotion. The same one he was wearing when I found him in her office. I had kept it, not out of sentimentality, but because I knew one day it would serve its purpose. A symbol. A souvenir of the moment everything changed. I didn't include a return address. I simply wrote his name and the last known address I had. Dropping it in the mailbox felt like placing the last stone on a grave. Not a grave of our relationship, but of who I used to be when I allowed him to define my worth. I walked home slowly, the evening air crisp with the first hint of fall. Leaves crunched under my shoes, and the city lights shimmered like quiet confessions in the dark. I didn't wonder how he would react. That was no longer my concern. I had long since stopped measuring my healing by his recognition. This was about me, about honoring the version of myself who had survived the storm and built something beautiful from the wreckage. That night, I slept with the windows open, the breeze dancing through the curtains like a lullaby. And I dreamed, not of him, not of revenge, but of a future so full of light it didn't have room for shadows. The next morning, I woke up with a rare kind of calm, the kind that comes when every thread is tied off, every loose end tucked in, and all that's left is forward. I poured myself coffee, stood by the window, and looked out at the world I had rebuilt. Everything was mine now, not just the apartment or the title on my desk, but the way I carried myself, the choices I made, the peace I protected. I didn't need anyone to validate that journey. I had lived it, breathed it, fought for it, and I had won, not by destroying him, but by refusing to let him destroy me. Some people seek revenge through chaos, through exposure, through spectacle. But the most devastating revenge I found was simple. I moved on. I healed. I thrived. And I did it all without losing my soul in the process. Looking back now, I realized that the real turning point in my story wasn't the betrayal, or even the moment I walked away. It was the moment I chose to rise instead of sink. It would have been easy to let bitterness define me, to carry that hurt like a shield and use it to justify shutting everyone out. But I didn't want to become a reflection of what had broken me. I wanted to become the woman I'd always envisioned. Strong, clear, graceful under pressure, and unshakably self-assured. And I did. Not overnight, not without setbacks, but step by deliberate step. I learned that silence can be the loudest declaration of power, that walking away with your head high is sometimes more effective than any explosion of anger. The poetic justice wasn't just in what happened to him, it was in what didn't happen to me. I didn't crumble. I didn't get lost in the noise. I didn't become bitter. I became better. That's the truth people rarely talk about after betrayal, that your healing isn't measured by the other person's downfall. It's measured by the peace you reclaim, the nights you sleep through again, the mornings you wake up excited instead of anxious. It's in the way you laugh without restraint, the way you look in the mirror and finally recognize the fire behind your eyes. That's what I found, and that's what I've kept. I don't regret loving him. I regret trusting someone who hadn't earned it. But even that regret has softened into something almost like gratitude, because without that heartbreak, I might still be playing small in a life built around someone else's comfort. Now, I don't shrink for anyone. I don't justify my boundaries. I don't explain my standards. I live fully, fiercely, unapologetically. And if there's one thing I could say to the woman I was on the day it all fell apart, standing in that office doorway with a cake in one hand and shattered illusions in the other. It would be this: you won't just survive. You'll rise so high from this that one day you won't even recognize the version of you who once begged for breadcrumbs. Because that's what real power looks like. Not revenge through destruction, but revenge through evolution, through peace, through choosing yourself so completely that the people who once underestimated you don't even get a second thought. And that, more than anything, is how you win. By no longer needing to. By knowing you already have.